Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Raj Rohatgi. I'm the Associate Director for Basic Science at SCI, and I'm really thrilled to welcome all of you, both those of you who are in person and those of you who are on Zoom, to our Breakthroughs in Cancer seminar for today. I'm really thrilled today to welcome Dr. Karen Knudsen, who is the Executive Strategic Advisor and immediate past CEO of the American Cancer Society. I'm going to let Melissa Bondi introduce her in just a second. But I want to take this opportunity to really highlight the BIC series. We are very, very thankful for your support and highlight some of the upcoming speakers. These are a list of speakers. Our speaker next month is Bill Kalin from the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. As many of you know, he won a Nobel Prize for his work on oxygen sensing in tissues and tumors. And he's going to talk about his work on the von Hippel-Lindau hereditary cancer pathway, its role in cancer and therapeutic strategies. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Melissa Bondi, who is the Chair of Population Sciences and AD at the SCI, for introductions. Thank you.
Thanks, Raj, and welcome to all of those who came in person and those that have registered and are joining us online. We're really happy you're here because I know this is going to be an incredible presentation today. I've personally known Karen for a really long time through several of her careers and her rise to where she is, because I met her when she was, I think, still a faculty member maybe at Thomas Jefferson, and then she became the head of their cancer center, and then, has gone on to do so many wonderful things. Karen, then ended up at the American Cancer Society as a C-suite leader with over 30 years of expertise spanning scientific innovation, clinical translation, academic healthcare leadership, health equity advocacy, and business transformation. I mean, she's just does it all. And, and I think as somebody said years ago, maybe I don't remember exactly, that she does it incredibly well. I don't think she has high heels on, but, she just is an amazing person who just is a basic science researcher all the way through to, as she told me earlier, she's already started a company and has done some amazing innovative work. So she's been serving as the executive, right now as the Executive Strategic Advisor and the immediate past CEO of the American Cancer Society. She has led many transformative initiatives, raised a huge amount of money, and actually has brought the American Cancer Society back into the 21st century of where it should be, because, I think for a long time people didn't really know what the mission was, but Karen brought that mission back to the public, and it has really been transformative with the work that she's done. And she's made an incredible impact in raising a significant amount of money. But before she went to the American Cancer Society, she served as the Executive Vice President of Oncology Services at Jefferson Health and Enterprise Director of the NCI designated Stanley Kimmel Cancer Center. And there she was probably one of the first women cancer center directors. There's been several others since then, but really has been a leader, and especially for those who have been cancer center directors. We serve together on the board of scientific advisors for NCI. We've been on quite a few different cancer center advisory boards together. I was on hers years ago, and even she tried to recruit me to Thomas Jefferson, but that's another story that we won't talk about. And but I'm just really delighted that she's here and that we have the opportunity to hear her presentation. She's been spending a lot of time in Palo Alto, so hopefully we will see her again after she's not the CEO of AC in her role as the at ACS. And I think that ends March the 3rd, and you're counting? Okay, great. Thank you, Karen. Come on up.
All right, well, it's really wonderful to be here. It is International Women in Science and Medicine Day, so, thrilled to have Dr. Bondi, longtime friend and colleague, to introduce me, and also to have Dr. Mitchell here, former Cancer Center Director at Stanford, and she and I were just remarking on the fact that we think the entire history of the NCI designated system, we can still, unfortunately, count on two hands the number of women who've ever been directors of NCI designated cancer centers. centers. And, she was just absolutely fantastic for this organization. And it's really a thrill to have her here as well. So I am delighted to talk about breakthroughs in cancer. And what I want to do today is to talk to you about something that really excites me, and that is getting innovation to people. I think that's probably what's defined my role as a scientist, as a translational prostate cancer focused scientist who was, fortunate enough to get some of my discoveries to change practice, but also as a healthcare executive, as a business leader, and now into thinking about how it is that we take the new capabilities that happen as a result of technology and use that to speed up progress against cancer. So I'm hopeful to take you on a little bit of an arc of a journey of the kinds of things that I've been really proud to lead, but also that excite me about the future moving forward. All right, so I do have some disclosures, but they don't really have anything to do with today. So I always like to think about the cancer problem by reminding this group of what is the problem that we're actually trying to solve. And that problem that we're trying to solve, the way I see it here in the US, is the 2 million individuals that will hear this year that they have a new cancer diagnosis. And to solve for the unfortunate more than 600,000 people in the US that will lose their life from cancer this year. Now, what I didn't fully appreciate in all of the time that I've been using this slide since I was a student and then a fellow is that this is data that's produced every year by the American Cancer Society, arguably putting together this single book of truth for what the cancer problem is in the nation, used by everyone, from the government to all academic centers. And it's just been an incredible honor to lead the organization over the last 4 years that puts together these data that truly are the greatest call to action of what it is that we have. And when I had an opportunity to come and lead the American Cancer Society out of a different model that they'd have for 100 plus years, where I really wanted to build is on the premise of the following guiding principle, that it really takes 3 parts working in synchrony to move the dial against cancer. One absolutely is research. It is, without question, we have to continue to innovate. You do this exceptionally well at Stanford. One of the things Dr. Artandi and I were talking about earlier today is how impressed I am with how science forward you are, even at the health system side, to say that the great care that happens here at Stanford happens because the science is informed by it, and the science is putting forward these new ideas for prevention, detection, and cure. You should be incredibly proud of that. And so, but to innovate is really not enough. And from my perspective, you need 2 additional arms in order to get those innovations to people. One is policy, and the other is thinking about gaps in access to care. And so when I came to the American Cancer Society, I told you that I needed to give it a different business model than it had, and it needed to be reimagined because for 100 plus years, it was operating as a federated model. Up until most recently, 12 separate organizations with 12 CEOs and 12 strategies. And the CEO just before me had put it together as one, but what it was yearning for was a way to really truly come together, identify its place in the cancer universe, to Dr. Bondi's point, and then execute on a plan to actually make a difference. But the first step was really to decide why that organization exists. And the way that we operate now at ACS is a very clear articulation of the fact that we exist because the burden of cancer is unacceptably high. But in the grand scope of things, whom do we stand for? And what is it that we're going to align our programming around? So where we first stacked hands 4 years ago when I came in was the fact that we would put patients and their families, which is a placeholder for their caregiver, at the center of our decision making. We love scientists, we fund science, and we're going to talk about that, but it is not why we exist. We love health systems because that's where patients go to get cancer detected, cancer prevented, and cancer cured, but that's not why we exist. We exist because of cancer patients and families, and that's the special sauce of ACS. And so our mission then became something very clearly articulated in this new era, and that's to improve lives of our 2 key stakeholders, cancer patients and families. So I want you to hold me accountable if I tell you something today that you think is misaligned to this, then I had not done my job as CEO. and that we would align around 3 different pillars, as I called them, in order to get that done. But we would stand on, and I'm still saying this today, February 11th, 2025, is that we still stand on our commitment to ensure that what we are delivering on gives everyone an opportunity to prevent, detect, and survive cancer. So that commitment to health equity. But we would stand on 3 pillars: discovery, policy, and direct patient support. Not surprising given what I just told you. So these were net new. And what I want to do is very quickly just kind of walk you through the things that I'm very proud that my team and I have accomplished over these last 4 years. But I also want you to know that the mission is important. It's what we do every day. Improving lives is a measurable thing, and that's how we define success for ourselves at ACS. But we always kept our eyes on what success looked like, and that was to end cancer as we know it for everyone. So if we can't decide between 2 different programs, we lean on which one is more likely to get us to what that is. So let's talk about our comfort zone, science. We all know that science must continue. And one of the things I also really loved about ACS is we produced these data. These data, which I think are arguably the most important piece of data that come out every year to articulate why science matters. So what you're looking at are cancer mortality rates for men on the left, women on the right, starting in the 1970s when the war on cancer was born in the U.S. and the U.S. Cancer Center system was really initiated in the U.S. So had we done nothing, what would have been realized is what's shown there in red. But what actually happened with an inflection point circa 1991 was this decline in cancer mortality rate that actually is getting faster, this flattening of a curve that's getting faster over and over again over time. So what happened in 1991? This was the high watermark for cancer mortality rate in the United States. But circa 1991 is when the U.S. government and organizations like ACS really doubled down in investing in cancer science. And so when we look at that delta, what we see now is since that high watermark of cancer mortality rate in 1991, there's been a 34% overall reduction in cancer mortality, totaling more than 4.4 million lives saved as a function of cancer research. So we felt pretty great about that. And being able to go and talk about that is probably the more important now than ever, to talk to elected officials, lay people, your neighbor, people who care. Because I think there is such a good return on investment in the form of lives when it comes to cancer research. And ACS was no small player. So I started to use that 1991 high watermark as what have we done since then? What have you done for me lately? Forgive me, Janet Jackson, for copying you there. But we've given out more than 15,000 individual grants, totaling almost $4 billion since that time. So ACS has not been a small player. It makes us the largest funder of cancer research outside the U.S. government. So we have a lot of reason to be able to say, lean in with us. There's more to be done, and we can't do it all. But I think just articulating as scientists why it is that science matters is really key. And the way that we function at ACS on the research side is really twofold. We're kind of like the NIH. We have an intramural program and we have an extramural program. The intramural program consists of population science, epidemiology, the kind of groups that produce the data that I just talked to you about. That analysis of cancer incidence and mortality across the country is a massive, massive research endeavor. But they also, and so this is the report that you see that I think we all use. I don't have to explain that to you. But something that would seem to me, and I try to talk about this whenever I'm around the country because I think it somehow got lost from the scientific consciousness, is the capacity to fund cohorts. So ACS has been funding cohorts and studying healthy individuals since the 1950s. The things that you know about the relationship between smoking and cancer came from ACS cohort studies, and we continue to do them to this day. The current cohort has more than 300,000 individuals that have been enrolled in this study that we've been following over their lifetime. We know everything about them, their job, their medical history, their family history. We now have we have samples if they get cancer. We have DNA for many of them. We have information about their exposures. For some, we now have samples from microbiome. So if this is an area of interest for you and you would like to consider collaborative studies, cohorts are are open for that. We are just lifting up our most recent cohort, which is called Voices, and Voices is a specific cohort. First time we've ever done a specific cohort, and this is geared toward Black women to try to understand the disproportionate burden of Black women on a subset of cancers that are very aggressive, like triple-negative breast cancer. So we're just starting enrolling there. So the intramural program is small but mighty. The extramural program is probably the thing that you know best. We just talked about who's coming after me in this seminar series, and my good friend Bill Kalin will be the first to tell you that he got his first grant from the American Cancer Society. If I had $1 for every time somebody told me that their first meaningful grant was from ACS, I would have been able to fund many more studies. You too, Julian? Yeah, okay, let's just have fun. Who's ever gotten a grant from the American Cancer Society in the room? Ooh, not so many. Okay, all right. Well, we're going to work on that. Noted. But this is what we always hear. So we really want to make sure that we're putting, a significant amount of dollars out. We're now at about $465 million committed in cancer research funding. So again, not small. But we did start to think really differently 4 years ago with the hire of my new chief science officer, Bill Dayhood, who is just, I can't say enough good things about how we complement the kind of studies that are funded by other organizations. And so we lifted up a number of programs. I want to give a call to action to this one because, again, in your DNA here at Stanford is innovation. So one of the things that we think we know to be true is that cancer care is going home. Cancer detection is going to go home. Cancer management is going to go home. And so we lifted up AHEAD grants. It stands for Advancing Health Equity and Addressing Disparities. And so these are the kinds of things that we fund are what does cancer care delivery look like at home? What does implementation science look like at home or closer to home? These are things that are very hard to get funded at the national level through the NIH or the NCI. And we thought that this is one of the ways that we can take innovation and spark the kind of innovation who can really make a difference. And we've been really thrilled about the incredible technological advances that we think can come from some of the people that we funded through there. So the science will, of course, continue to be a priority even when I leave ACS on March 3rd. They're in great shape, so now's the time. But it is the case that we do know that despite all the best science, that the advances that we've made since 1991 have not benefited everyone. And what you're looking at here are just those sustained disparities. It's just one kind of disparity with Black individuals in the red line and whites in the gray, males and females at the top, prostate and breast cancer at the bottom. We've all seen these curves. And so we have to do something quite different if we are going to get these kinds of innovations to people. And we initially, as an organization, studied that, actually. We actually funded quite a large number of studies about what causes cancer disparities that are either geographic or demographic in nature. And the list is not surprising, I think, to this group. It's things that are let's call it, the non-biologic reasons that people don't survive cancer. Lack of transportation. If I can only get to the chemotherapy center 3 days a week, but Melissa can get there 5 days a week, who's going to have a better outcome? We know that we have to solve for these things. Transportation, lodging, digital and health literacy, financial toxicity, lack of access to coverage, and then just some biases that exist, and things like not asking people if they want to be on clinical trial, when we know the vast majority of people actually want to be on clinical trial if asked. So when I came to ACS, we committed to stopping doing this. One of my brilliant leaders, Lisa Lacasse, that I have the pleasure to work with, said we've got to stop admiring the problem. And she was absolutely right. And so we are committed to not funding any of the research that does that, but rather fund the research that does implementation to get beyond it. And we have to, right? Because our vision statement said that we would end cancer as we know it for everyone. And I started to call these 8 words that define us. Not all words were created equal, and these last 2 were really and still are part of the differentiation of the American Cancer Society. So this is where the getting those innovations to people started to become really important. And 2 major levers, advocacy, a huge one. So this is where we work. So I have a large, geographic workforce, or ACS has a large geographic workforce around the country, where we have an operation for advocacy in all 50 state capitals as well as at the federal level. And what we do, because we're a 501c4, which is fancy tax code for saying we can and do lobby. We've got a lawyer in the room, so we've got to be super careful to make sure I describe that right. Am I good, Kevin? Okay. So what we do is take data generated from the science, or take data generated from the patients that we help across the country and convert that into, let's call it no-nonsense practical regulation and policy to affect change. Here's some examples. We can only do this if we have patient stories that come from places like this at Stanford to tell a story about why it's important for someone to get access to a cancer breakthrough that was funded by research. The first major federal win that we had was January 2023, and it had to do with follow-on colonoscopy. So tell me if this made sense to you, because prior to that date, what would happen is if you took a Cologuard test at home or a stool-based test at home and you tested positive for colorectal cancer, and then the next thing that needed to happen for you is you needed to get a colonoscopy, now you were stuck with the bill for the colonoscopy. Why? Because it's not screening anymore. You already tested positive at home. You screened positive at home. So now you got to pay for your colonoscopy. This had the exact opposite impact of what was expected and intended, because what was happening is people who tested positive said, wait, I have to go pay for this colonoscopy now, so now I'm not going to do it. We all know people delay cancer screening for any possible reason, so throw a barrier in there. And the data showed us that this was a real barrier. We showed the data, we made it a federal priority. January 1, 2023, President Biden instructed CMS to ensure that follow-on colonoscopy was covered. Buoyed by that success, we lifted up what was arguably one of my biggest goals, not just as the head of ACS, but as a person. And that was to ensure that patient navigation became a reimbursable component of cancer care. As a former healthcare executive leading oncology for a 16-hospital system across 2 states, if I could just pick one program, just one thing, that I would have wanted to give more dollars to because of the massive impact that I think it had on people's outcomes and treatment compliance, it would have been patient navigation. So every time we got into a discussion with the White House team about moonshots and how we can move the cancer problem, I kept responding with patient navigation, that this is something that needs to be a reimbursable component of cancer care. And we knew this because we'd been studying it. We knew this because we had data on it, and we knew it from patient stories. We also knew that 91% of cancer patients who were an existing cancer patient answered saying they wanted to have a navigator. So the demand was there. So we converted that into action. I could not have been more delighted when we got the call that this was going to happen. And January 1, 2024, this became a reimbursable component of cancer care. Dr. Ortandia and I were talking about that today when we were discussing how we might expand patient navigation. And this does relate to research because patients who have a navigator understand their care plan. They're much more likely to complete their care as planned. They have an overall lower cost of care, and they are much more likely to be considered for clinical trial. So it does influence and impact the research enterprise as well. So I couldn't be more happy about this. I feel really terrific about it. And then I also wanted to give an example about how you get innovation to people through state law, because so many of the decisions about healthcare in the United States are made at the state level. And so one of the things that we recognize is that many of the state plans for healthcare were not covering biomarker testing. So for all of us toiling away on things that target HER2, high tumors or EGFR receptor positive tumors, what is the point of developing those therapeutics if no one is actually getting access to determine whether or not their cancer actually has HER2 or is EGFR positive, and and so on and so on. And so we went to work. We first went to work at the state of Illinois. We had it passed into law circa 2022, and that gave us an idea for model legislation that we could move forward to other states. So you can see where we are. We've had really good success in a large number of states to now pass this into law, so that's a requirement to cover biomarker testing. Everybody wins. The patient gets the right care the first time. There's an overall lower cost of care because you're not guessing. And the science actually gets utilized and implemented. So also feeling really terrific about this. The only thing not to feel really terrific about here in the state of California is I've had 2 governors veto. One was here in California. But we ultimately then had a lot of discussions with Governor Newsom about why biomarker testing was incredibly important for the people of California, and ultimately he signed this into law. So re-educating governors is a big part of what we do too. But we can't do it alone, and we don't do it without your stories as scientists, your stories as health system leaders, and the most important reason is the stories that come from your patients. So advocacy, the way I see it, is always going to be the tip of the spear for the American Cancer Society. It's what leads to durable solutions. But the right now, everyday solution that people really care about, bucketed under things I found at ACS that we're living in all these different geographic pockets and people were doing different things. So we bundled together best practices and we called it patient support. And I created a job description of the leader for this, for a visionary leader, to be our very first ever chief patient officer, to solve for those 9 non-biologic reasons why people don't survive cancer. And until we found him, I actually had the chance to serve as that first chief patient officer and CEO for a little while, and then found just a phenomenal leader and Dr. Arif Kamal, who came from Duke to lead this. And I have to say, I'm just thrilled with what he's done. So here's where we work. So we work in 5,000 communities across the country supporting patients for these gaps. Just this part of ACS touches 55 million unique lives every year, again, because we're measuring this. We're measuring what it is, the impact is that we've had. Some of that comes through an immediate reach out to the American Cancer Society when someone gets a cancer diagnosis. We have no vested interest in where anyone gets care. So, and again, we're kind of thought of as that single book of truth for all things cancer information. So cancer.org, but that by itself is 50 million unique users every year that come to us to try to get reliable information about cancer. But we also recognize that we need to solve for these other gaps. So let's just pick out 2 that I think are real crown jewels in the crown of the American Cancer Society. One are the Hope Lodges. So we have 32 Hope Lodges across the country where we house cancer patients and families free of charge during care. Really important for somebody who has a challenging cancer diagnosis or is far away. You can imagine all the reasons why this happens. Some patients stay 200 days. Now, I have to say that some of my best days as CEO is showing up at the Hope Lodge, which we have one in Philadelphia, so I knew, firsthand how important these were, but I visit them everywhere I go, is to just go serve dinner with the patients. And if you really want to know, like, what is it like for a cancer patient or their caregiver, you go and serve the patients dinner at the Hope Lodge. They don't know who you are. They just know that you're a volunteer who's there. And it's really some of the best days you will ever have. I can't say enough good things about these, and I'm very proud about it. We are looking to scale these back to the federated model of the American Cancer Society. There's actually only one Hope Lodge west of the Rockies, and it's in Honolulu. Dr. Bondi knows how important that is, because if you have cancer in the Hawaiian Islands or Guam or anywhere in the Pacific Island, you need to come to Oahu for care. And there are not a lot of people who can afford to stay in a hotel room in Honolulu for 5 weeks during chemotherapy. So really important for us to have these. And we're talking about one in Northern California. And I hope it's something that individuals who need to come here can actually take advantage of. So some more to come on that. The other is Road to Recovery. This is something anybody can do. I know scientists and clinicians around the country, when I talk about this, have really enjoyed getting involved in Road to Recovery. It's where you give a ride to cancer patients and their families. I don't know what happens, here at Stanford, but when I was running oncology for Jefferson Health, 16% of our patients on any given year could not complete CARES plan because they had no ride. And so, having an opportunity for someone who really wants to give back to the cancer problem, and they can give back once a month, once a year, once a day, to give a ride is really terrific. And as a scientist, as a clinician, gives you an opportunity to have a real life experience with a patient and hear what they're going through, because trust me, they are going to talk to you about what's going on. And when we can, we match people. There's someone who's been a caregiver for someone with pancreatic cancer is driving somebody with pancreatic cancer. So it's another program that makes me really feel phenomenal about it. I'm going to be very excited when there's a day when patient support doesn't need to exist. But right now, it's actually the biggest team at the American Cancer Society because the need is so strong throughout the country. So we did a lot in 4 years. And I am just thrilled to death by, what it is that we've been able to do. And so, we talk about this a lot publicly, so I thought I would share it with you here. I came in at the beginning of 2021 to think through how ACS would be different. It was really tough because we had a lot fewer employees than we had ever had at the organization. And at the same time, as Melissa's point, we raised more money than ever before with a lot fewer people. But it's not about the raising money. In fact, the raising money is kind of a goal for us based on the programming that we want to run. And I think that's what really defined us, how we got our highest rating ever in Charity Navigator, and then started to think through how it is we have impact. And the Hope Lodge program is a perfect example. So, pre-pandemic, we were housing about 142,000 nights of lodging for people. In this last year, we actually surpassed the 500,000 mark of number of nights of lodging for people. So these are real things that actually do save lives outside delivering care. So very excited about that. High water mark, putting more dollars out into cancer science than we ever have before. We started to track what do our advocacy wins look like. We kind of joked with the advocacy team after 2023 because we track it based on a policy change that actually got implemented, not just an activity that we did, but did the law or regulation get passed? That's how we tracked it. And we had such a banner year in 2023, we'll never top it again. So we really have to celebrate and enjoy that one. And then in patient support, we actually just started tracking it. So, prior to these last 4 years, if we ask how many people did we give rides to give cancer care, and who were they? Were they men, women? How far did they go? What kind of cancers did they have? Why did they need it? So we became, for lack of a better word, data curious, and then use that data about patients and what they needed, scientists and what they need. We do poll the cancer center directors every year to say, what should we be funding? And so you can look at Dr. Artandi, and he can, if you don't like what we're funding, you can kind of blame him for right now. Just kidding. But it's the case that we use that data to turn into how it is that we can be the most high impact organization that we could be. And that's what gave us, I think, great bones. And I think this is how ACS will continue to look in this new iteration, is centering on cancer patients and families and having these 3 pillars of science, and then getting the science to people through advocacy and through patient support. But I think that the value add-on that was not planned at the beginning for this new structure and new ACS Reimagine had to do with not just innovating around how we think about ourselves at ACS and not innovating about how we support innovative science, but what do we do outside kind of the more traditional model of a traditional not-for-profit organization that could really move the dial? And so that's where I want to spend the rest of the time, is thinking through what's the else that innovation look like, and hit on a few things. And I think there was a great case for innovation. The environment was right. As ACS started to find its new cadence and its new stride, and we had a lot more resources, we started to challenge ourselves. How do we leverage breakthroughs in precision medicine and the onset of AI? I know everybody's talking about AI and sprinkling AI on everything, and I'm going to fall prey to that today. But how do we manage that? How do we take immunotherapy, and that is just absolutely blowing our minds, of new capabilities in curing cancers that we never thought about before? And how do we also take the interest in venture capital in science and in cancer science, where we have such a good return on investment, and move that forward in a way that ACS can really drive? So I want to spend the rest of the time talking about those kinds of things and kinds of innovation, and introduce to you a couple of things that we've done, and some things that are adjacent. So, mission-aligned businesses. This is something we didn't really have before, something you do a lot here at Stanford. What is it? How is it that you can create value in another way? And in our case, value towards improving the lives of cancer patients and families. So one is LION. This one won't surprise you. So LION is Leadership in Oncology Navigation. It is our credentialing program for patient navigators. If patient navigation is going to be a reimbursable component of cancer care, they have to be trained and they have to be credentialed. So we didn't want to just pass this into law and say, yeah, good luck to you, figure out how that's going to work. The day that got passed into becoming a reimbursable component of care, we lifted up a credentialing and training program for patient navigators. And we could do this because we've been running the National Navigation Roundtable for years, which sets best practices for what patient navigators should do, how they should be trained, and what they shouldn't do. So this is a really phenomenal way for us to train all of these kinds of individuals for navigators that will help them, for example, understand how to query whether or not a patient may be interested in clinical trial. So this is our way of supporting the advocacy by allowing additional mechanisms for someone to actually become a patient navigator. So that was probably the most obvious, but still for a not-for-profit to set up these kind of mission-aligned businesses that's outside the core of what you normally do is a bold step, and I'm really thankful for that. A second one that we set up, which I feel really so positive about, was a great story. And it's a joint venture with an entity called Color Health, which is a Bay Area located organization. Color Health I knew from my days as an executive at Jefferson. We'd worked with them to try to democratize genetic testing for our employee base. We made actually color genetic testing part of our HR benefit for all 33,000 then employees at Jefferson Health, so that people had an opportunity to understand their own risk of cancer in a clinically certified test, and also have access to unrestricted access to genetic counselors who could help walk them through what that meant for them and set up the right screening program. So, long time, real great relationship with Color Health turned into opportunity when we started to really realize we had to think differently about how to get people into early detection and screening programs. And one of the things that was a real call to action for us to get moving is that cancer became, just a couple of years ago, the #1 cost of care for employers of all mid and large-sized companies. So we all know the cost of overall healthcare is exploding for everyone, self-included, but when this actually cancer took the mantle, gave us an opportunity to say, we actually really need to think about this differently, because patients are going to have a better chance at outcome, but also a lower cost of care if it's the case that we can get them into prevention and early detection. And these are just some of the examples. So, for many solid tumor cancers, of course, it's relatively obvious, and 98% survival rate for breast cancer if caught at stage 1, 30% if caught at stage 4. We all recognize that. But even in much more challenging cancers like lung cancer, just look at the differences of a 57% chance of survival when caught at early stage versus single-digit survival when caught at stage 4, and the delta for cost for 1 year cost of care is goes up by just a multitude. So we know that this is really important. We as cancer scientists understand how important early detection is, but when we're moving into the employer space, being able to give them the health economics argument of it's not only the right thing to do for your employees, but it's also going to save you money, starts to get you into a very different mindset of thinking. And so we took that and said, we have so many gaps that we need to address. Some of these you guys know, 65% of America that's behind on cancer screening, and I don't know how much time you spend in public service announcements about screening. We do it all the time too, and it has a limited impact. So we have to think differently. We also know, let's say somebody wants to come here and be seen at Stanford. The average waiting time, I don't know what it is here, I'm sure it's very short, but the average waiting time for an academic medical center is 70 days. I don't know anybody who would want their loved one to wait 70 days to get into a program. And so lots and lots of touch points that we talked to Color Health about and said, let's solve for these things. Let's see what it is that we can do when we work together. So we, ACS, really care about putting people into screening. It's part of our patient support program. Of course, excuse me, our science teams also write cancer screening guidelines. So we have a real vested interest in getting this done. Color had taken technology to send cancer screening to home. Some of this is really obvious, stool-based testing for colorectal cancer. Some is obvious, but not that easy. It had not been easily implemented. Things like using a finger prick or blood draw at home so that men have greater access to prostate cancer specific antigen testing. et cetera, but also cancer risk testing. So back to what I talked about that we did at Jefferson Health, the literal spit in the tube, send it away, get your genetic analysis, and then have an opportunity to talk to the genetic counselor. So we started there by implementing this as a joint venture. And what we saw was a really, really stunning set of returns, including a 77% increase in screening rates for people who took on the Color Health program. This was so good that I, as CEO, brought this on for my own employee base because I thought that this is perfect for individuals at the American Cancer Society. So I'm talking to you as someone who set up this joint venture, but then also paid for it for my own employees. And to date, what we saw is that this reduced overall cost of healthcare in this 1.5 years that we've been down this road with Color Health. So the early returns are really good. And then Color got really ambitious, and they started to think through something that I think is inevitably true. And we're going to all kind of maybe get a little bit uncomfortable here. But there are elements of cancer care that are going to go home, period, end of story. It just is what it is. If you look at the number of agents that are approved that are orals, it's without question that some things that are happening right now in the chemotherapy center are going to be happening with an oral agent and going home. Color Health is getting ready for that. There are a number of organizations, maybe some things are happening here too. They probably are, of getting ready for cancer care at home. But so what Color Health built is a virtual cancer clinic where their oncologists are licensed in all 50 states to take cancers that can be managed from home and start to manage those cases, or work with the academic site, the high acuity site, or the high performing cancer center, develop a treatment plan, and then see what can be done that's closer to home. And so this is early on, but already about 2 million lives covered in this, and so very excited to see where this goes. I think this is just inevitable that this is where technology is going to go. I think a lot of different kinds of medical care are going to go home, and we're excited to work with Color Health on determining what that impact looks like. So those are two of the very kind of discrete mission-aligned businesses that we put together that I think leverage innovation. But where this is probably illustrated best is in something that we breathed life into now almost 4 years ago called BrightEdge. And BrightEdge is our impact in innovation arm. So for us, this made a ton of sense, and I know that there are others like Pisces and a few other organizations who've taken a really similar mindset. But for us, if we're the largest funder of cancer research outside the U.S. government, how many great ideas die on the laboratory floor, as Dr. Sage and I were talking about today, that didn't get to that step of clinical testing or didn't get to the step of being able to form a company? And so we formed, we took BrightEdge and kind of remodeled it for its new purpose to kind of do exactly what this group will understand immediately, which is to catalyze that observation to the point where it actually gets into translational evaluation. So I want to give you a couple quick examples and then also tell you about some that are kind of adjacent to BrightEdge that I'm pretty excited about to close. So here's a perfect example of our mindset and how we think. So we all know that this is the golden age of oncology, but also definitely the golden age of immuno-oncology. And we have a lot to learn and still so much in order to really be realized with regard to solid tumors. So we had funded a fellow, and the fellow was excited about a potential therapeutic for glioblastoma using immunotherapy. It was also the case that this person's PI was putting together a startup company. We got excited about it, and we invested. We actually invested twice. The company's called Immunitas. I'm not endorsing Immunitas, just for the record, but just letting you know this is the kind of thing that we really are interested in being bold in trying to solve. So we've participated in the raise of Immunitas, and they've been able to bring their concept into clinical testing. So for us, this starts to look like a win. Why? Because the win is getting access of innovation to people. That's how I started, and that's really the goal here of BrightEdge. The way that we think about our ability to invest in an early stage company is it has to meet two criteria. One is that the product or service, whatever it is, has to meet our mission to improve the lives of cancer patients or families. If we can't defend that argument, we shouldn't be investing in it. And the second is to go through our investment committee. It doesn't make sound sense for us to get there. So I'm very excited about Immunitas. I'm hopeful that this is really going to be a game changer. But we have fulfilled, if you're going to invest early stage, of course, some of these things are not going to hit pay dirt at the end. But what we really want to do is to get innovation to people, and this met that goal. But not all things are therapeutics. In fact, many of them are not. So an example of one that's not that I'm pretty excited about is TaylorMed. TaylorMed relates very specifically to patient navigation. What it is it's meant to offset financial toxicity. Just so you know, again, from data that we had collected, cancer patients who get a diagnosis, 40% of them in the United States deplete their entire life savings in 2 years. So this is not sustainable. We know that there are mechanisms to offset this, and sometimes they're accessed too late. It's also the case the health system gets punished on this because they have some debt incurred. So TaylorMed is a strategy to use software solutions to anticipate and offset financial toxicity. It's been implemented now after we've been investing into TaylorMed into more than 1,000 sites of care and shown to have some true efficacy. So again, a great example of how BrightEdge gives benefit to people even before something that a traditional venture fund might realize as being a return on investment, like a financial return. Of course, we hope that there are financial returns that go back into the cancer research mission. This is an example of how we see wins. So when we think about our portfolio at BrightEdge, we think about it as an entire cancer continuum. We're not just investing in therapeutics. That's not aligned to the mission of what it is that I outlined for you at the beginning. It's everything from prevention all the way through survivorship. So if you have an early stage company and you're interested in being funded by BrightEdge, please let me know. Happy to put you in touch with the portfolio team. But very interested in working with series companies trying to raise their Series A that align to our mission. And I would say that we're very excited about the fact that we've had 26 overall investments and 7 exits, the most recent being Modify Bio. So feeling really terrific about our ability to pick winners here. So I want to end by taking some examples and some adjacent examples that I think are aligned to how we leverage AI to solve for the cancer problem. Just give you 3 quick examples, and some of them actually relate to Stanford, and then we'll end. So one that I am personally thrilled by, which you will not find surprising based on everything that I've told you, is that we must solve for the problem of giving patients access to cancer clinical trials. I think all of us experience the fact that we know that childhood cancers are rare, but also much highly survivable compared to adult cancers. And it's no surprise that when you compare the number of patients who go on clinical trial in the pediatric versus the adult setting could not be more different. 75% plus of pediatric patients go on clinical trial and single digits in the adult side. That's not sustainable. Every cancer center director, Dr. Mitchell will agree, Dr. Ortandi will agree, wakes up every day trying to figure out how you're going to get more patients on clinical trial. So everybody's motivated. Your care teams are motivated, the patients want it, but it's not happening. So we have to think differently. We have to take off the burden and reduce gaps in the workforce. So enter Paradigm Health. We invested in them at BrightEdge. We actually have some of the leadership from Paradigm here today, which is really terrific. And what they do is essentially try to solve for exactly the problems that we just talked about. And there were some things in here that if I were pharma and looking at, I would think, okay, gasp, 80%, the number of drugs that fail to meet enrollment targets or timelines for drugs. So if you're pharma, how is that sustainable? And why do you want to continue to invest in clinical trials in the United States? In fact, we were just at JP Morgan hearing some of the CEOs of pharma saying we're going to have to do trials overseas because we just can't get it done here. So we've got to start to think differently. And what I really enjoy about the Paradigm Group is that they're using AI in every possible step here. So leveraging AI for just planning and feasibility of helping cancer centers or health systems determine whether or not the trial is right for them, is it the right fit for them, starting to do prediction of what does this really look like, and then LLM dependent decision support. So all there in the planning. And then recruitment, the thing I know that was very much a pain point for me at Jefferson of how it is that we're going to optimize recruitment for trials that we think are really important. And what I would have killed for is for every single patient to be pre-screened for trials that we had open. That to me is just that alone would have been really exciting. But then we also know, let's say you open the trial, the patients enrolled, there's significant number of shortages in the workforce that are sustained. I hear it at every cancer center across the AWS about how to keep the data managers and the research coordinators engaged and able to handle essentially the volume of what it is that you want to do. So, very excited about this. The early returns for Paradigm have been exactly what we wanted to see at the American Cancer Society, and that is an increase in, just some anecdotes I won't go through in great detail, but in the places where it's been deployed, a significant uptick in the number of patients enrolled in study, the quickness of which patients were enrolled in study, and I think proof positive of how excited people are about this. They've just signed for almost the entire country of Japan to do clinical trials matching for Japan, and a significant number of health systems in Israel. So this is so aligned to our goals, our DNA at the American Cancer Society, because what's all the science for, again, if we're not getting it to people, and clinical trials have to be that, and now is the time to leverage technology. So that's a clinical trial strategy. But I also told you that we really care about early detection. And so, this is a company that just very recently became engaged with called XI. We have not invested in XI Bio, but gotten pretty excited about, or I personally am very excited about their technology. And so their whole goal is to use AI for cancer detection. The use case is a little different. So it's a blood-based strategy. It's not like GRAIL it's not looking for circulating tumor cells or circulating tumor DNA. It's actually using RNA, which I thought was really interesting, and then using AI to fill in the gaps. But the concept that oncRNAs that can be detected are more likely to be attributed to an active tumor that is likely to be clinically meaningful. And so that's what they're testing right now. And the use case that really got my attention is women with dense breasts. We all know women with dense breasts, obviously the woman on the right here, have a much higher chance of developing breast cancer over their lifetime. But it's also the case that these cancers are very difficult to detect. The woman on the right actually has a bigger tumor than the woman on the left. You just can't see it. And so using blood-based strategies for women with dense breasts to determine whether or not they have a cancer that just can't be imaged right now is a really exciting research study. So again, early stage companies are excited to think about how it is that they get that innovation to people to test hypotheses. So they're on the precipice of opening up a study called Empower Her, again, for women with dense breasts, because right now the FDA has said, if I walk into mammography tomorrow and I get told that I have dense breasts, I get told I have dense breasts. And I get told I have high risk. And then I say, so what should I do about it? And the response is, so this really fits a use case, a testable use case. So pretty excited about what this actually might mean for women with dense breasts, which is a pretty significant challenge here in the United States. So very excited about Empower Her and hopeful for that kind of technology. And so lastly, I want to end on one that is really exciting for me, and I have served as a board advisor for them on behalf of ACS, called Artera AI. Artera AI, I think, kind of defines AI not just being an aspiration, but actually going into proven clinical utility. And I want to spend a second talking about the two founders of Artera AI. Both are Stanford grads as undergrads, Dr. Felix Feng and Andre Esteva. Andre, is a developer. He's a coding guy, and came from here and worked from Salesforce and was developing part of their medical AI. Felix Feng was a radiation oncologist at UCSF and a true pioneer in the prostate cancer world. He could flow seamlessly from bench to bedside. And unfortunately, Felix passed away just a few months ago at the age of 48 for a very rare small bowel cancer, kind of underscoring how difficult it is, even when you're in the system, to survive cancer if it's really something that is so incredibly aggressive despite having access to the best possible care. Artera AI, during the time that Felix was alive, was born on the idea that we can use AI to take all clinical data, everything from the H&E to the patient's information, and develop predictive and prognostic tests. The hypothesis turned out to be true. So this is the kind of thing that got developed using that combined expertise, which I know is, I met with so many wonderful trainees today, and it was just happening there in the room to have those that were the technologists and the builders and the material scientists scientists working alongside the bench scientists, and that's really what also happened at Artera, of taking together all the clinical information and developing, for example, a prognostic risk stratification. So you could tell men who are diagnosed with prostate cancer what their chances are going to be of developing, for example, distant metastases, which are incurable in the context of prostate cancer. These have now been included into NCCN guidelines. It's what I mean about this not being aspirational. This is now that men can walk into the clinic and get their Artera AI strategy. I would say the NCCN also took 4 different guidelines, or 4 different tests, which could be used in this space, and brought it down to 2, given the performance now of Artera AI. So really important information that men want to know. It's almost 1/3 of the new cancer diagnoses in this country for men this year will be prostate cancer. And men want to know how aggressively they need to be treated, and this can give some concepts. And this just gives you an idea on the separation curve of a man who has an intermediate risk prostate cancer about whether or not he might need radiation therapy. And if you look at the separation curves that happen here with this testing, is pretty easily able to pick out who needs more intensive androgen deprivation therapy, who might not. So, an incredible win. But that wasn't it. So they moved on to predictive testing, also in the NCCN guidelines for predictive testing across most subtypes of prostate cancer, with many more to come that are specific to the precision medicine targeted agents that are happening there. So this gives you an example of kind of what this looks like. A 68-year-old guy walks into a clinic. He's got a PSA. It's just underneath 4. He's got Gleason 7 disease, which was, you're looking at that at a 3+4 and thinking, what are we going to do with this guy? But giving him an opportunity to see that, according to at least this testing mechanism, he's got a relatively low risk of developing metastatic disease, relatively low benefit that's being perceived from every clinical marker that he has of having to go on androgen deprivation therapy, which is a major quality of life change for men. So can't say enough good things about the science that's actually coming from Artera AI. And I wanted to end on that because it is such a wonderful example of brains born here in Stanford that leveraged new technology by bringing together the scientist and the developer to use AI for the greater good. And this is not replacing anybody's job. This is actually helping everyone in this prostate cancer clinic to probably deliver on better medicine. So a really clear case of AI for good. I should have also mentioned that for Paradigm Health, one of their leaders is also a Stanford grad as well, who I think worked just outside the hall here. So I want to end kind of on the following, and thank you for listening to my journey here on how now is the right time for innovation in business models, innovations in how you think about how it is that you deliver on a scientific mission, and how it is that you enhance the time for which, or accelerate the time for which you can get a patient access to care. So, certainly I think that we're going to see, if I'm predicting and reading the signs correctly, increasing pace of discovery for technology to help us solve across that entire cancer continuum. But what I would say from my perch is that those discoveries are not enough. But thinking through at the time you're developing that new company, the time you're developing the new strategy, what is the policy or the regulation that's going to be important in order for people to actually gain that? That's really important. And then how do we get the U.S. population or the global population prepared to take on things like at-home cancer testing, to take on things like multi-cancer early detection tests, or to leverage new technologies, or to feel comfortable having a conversation with their physician about some complicated algorithm that pumped out, yeah, you're at low risk, you don't need to take this drug. Well, how are you going to explain that to a patient? So really important for us to think through. But what I really think was said more than 100 plus years ago is that machines or technology don't isolate people from the problems of nature, but it plunges them more deeply into it. And I think you're doing that beautifully here at Stanford by taking your multidisciplinary teams and putting them together to take innovation and get it into greater cancer cures, or hopefully cancer prevention. So thank you so much for inviting me here. It's really been a pleasure, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Can't see very well. There's probably somebody has a question.
Well, I'll ask a question. I'm concerned about what seems to be an attack on science for the last decade and its impact on ability to raise funding for your kind of research. What can be done to improve things?
Yeah, so I'm just going to repeat the question for people who couldn't hear online. So the question is how do we handle the attack or skepticism about science? It seems to be scaling, I think, is a fair representation. Okay. So I mean, you're spot on. I think we really have to take the time to be intentional to discuss the importance of cancer research or the scientific enterprise overall with really anyone who will listen and give them easy words to use. And I think that's hard for us as a discipline because we're trained to be scientists or clinicians. We weren't trained to be communications experts, yet in the modern era, I think that's what we have to be. So I think from the perspective of ensuring that there's more support for scientific discovery, like it or not, I think we're going to have to be able to say in 2 sentences or less to our neighbors how it benefits them. And that's the way, the elected officials we also need to empower them with language to be able to explain to their constituents, this is why it benefits. And so having the stories like, I hope one of the ones I showed of the reduction in cancer mortality, which affects literally every family, I hope can be empowering. But I also think telling the stories of patients who've benefited from a scientific discovery in a very personal way and in a very emotionally compelling way is probably the juice is worth the squeeze for any operation, but especially an academic operation to take the time to do. So we all know it because we're living it every day. We take it for granted that everyone understands that cancer science is really important. But I think taking the time to tell the story will be key. I think, at least my experience of going around the country, literally every week of every year, is that even in a meeting of CEOs, we have these CEOs against cancer chapters across the country, even in those meetings, if you tell them that there's been a 34% reduction in cancer mortality since 1991, to say that they're full-on stunned is a massive understatement. So we've got to change the dialogue, I think, and be much more intentional about what is the communication strategy that's going to help us talk to the American public. And it won't be one organization that solves it.
To be a little deeper, because we're facing your question's even more important now. And what is the American Cancer Society thinking they're going to do to help raise money as our funding is going to be reduced? And we know that, especially in areas that are not favorable to our new administration. And I think we need ACS, we need these philanthropic organizations more than ever. And I don't know if you've had some thoughts about that in the last 48 hours.
Pretty much daily. So yes, this is, I hate to say this, it's not surprising, right? Because there are cycles, for whatever reason, where funding goes up and down. And so we always want to be prepared to make sure that we're catching some of the gaps. And for example, when Dr. Rathmel was the NCI director, she rang me and said, "Look, we're going to have to potentially do some cuts in fellowships. Can you guys potentially pick up the slack?" And we did. So we reallocated some funds to fellowship. We also could do away with some business models that I think helped get access to some of our fellowship funding. So for example, when I got to ACS, there was a rule on the books that anybody who was funded as a fellow needed to be a U.S. citizen or have a green card. And we didn't think that matched the contemporary laboratories in the United States. And so we eradicated that, and incredible new applicants came in. And so there's some business model things we can change. But I think it's also the case that we have tried to be very vocal about the importance of cancer science over the last 4 years, even more so than ever, with these key stakeholders, people like the CEOs group, so that they understand how important that it's not just screening that's important, but this is really key too. So I hope we're positioning ourselves to make sure that people understand the importance of cancer research funding. But the other story that I think we can tell is what happens when somebody loses their funding, because kind of back to what people are surprised by. They're surprised by the fact that you have to bring in some of your own salary. That's a shocker. Surprised that if you lose your grant funding, there's no safety net mechanism, that all of your students, your postdocs, your young bright minds that are going to change the world have to be dismissed, and that that stall really results in a lack of progress that has a knock-on effect for years and years. So I think telling those stories is going to be some of the ways that we preserve interest. And I think the final lever that I would suggest is I don't think anyone in the country wants us to lose our competitive edge in science. Look at your, what is it called, the innovation or discovery walk. I love this. You're so science forward and so proud of the science that's come out of Stanford. I don't think anybody aligned to this university wants you to lose that. It's your special sauce. And so telling that story in as many corners as possible, I think will be really helpful.
All right, everybody.
All right. Thanks, everyone. I'll be here.